Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla, a sex-positive hour of talk about kink, sexual mores, and writing dirty words. So grab a cup of cocoa, your favorite easy chair, and the lube as we go sailing into the dark, sweet waters of all things naughty on Licking Non-Vanilla with your hosts Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian.
Hey everybody, this is Ralph Greco Jr. from the wilds of somewhere in suburban New Jersey. I'm the co-host of Licking Non-Vanilla with the other co-hosts, because you can't be a co-host without another host. Anyway, across the aisle from me is...
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian, from the green pastoral landscape that is Eugene, Oregon.
A little hot though there, huh, right now?
It's a little warm. Yeah, it's like, of course, you can't really talk about the weather because someone is like from Arizona or something like that. It's like, you think it's hot? Well, it's warm for here.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to somebody in Las Vegas the other day. They were like, yeah, 109. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me, man.
Oh, shoot me. I just couldn't deal with that.
Yeah, my brain would just melt. Just no
absolutely.
way.
Absolutely. I just turned into a puddle.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, and we've, because at this point with this show, this will be, I guess episode 10 when it goes up. We have a good range of downloads now across the world. So it's not just in this country, and I'm very proud to say that. But
that's
and
wonderful.
I'm not doing that. Yeah, it's wonderful. But I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying that to illustrate the point that there's got to be weather that we don't even expect or even know about somewhere else. Weather extremes of weather, and just so wherever you happen to be, I hope you're comfortable at least.
Absolutely. And now with climate change, it's getting worse. So it's like places where it used to be not cold, it's getting cold. Places where it's been hot are getting really hot. So it's like, ew.
Yeah, just something. So I guess today we were gonna, because like I said again, we've had some great guests over the last couple episodes. And I said, well, I felt like maybe the both of us felt maybe it was a good idea just for you and I just to get on and jaw a bit, like we, like old school,
always game.
Yeah, just bat it back and forth. And I think because of what's been happening recently with us, we've had a couple of publishing things go by in good ways, not and I think we maybe we should just discuss that a little bit in detail about what we're doing publishing wise and what somebody could be doing publishing. We brushed over that for a while, and we do know this show's about more than just erotic writing, but it is about erotic writing sometimes. So let's just talk a little bit. You just put out a new book, right?
Yep.
Okay. And you went with one of our good friends and old time publishers for this book, right?
Exactly. Yep. The book's called Horror Sexual. It's a collection of my gay male erotic scary stories. So it's kind of a little bit of a niche there, but it was pretty easy to put together. I mean, that's one thing about collections. I mean, it's like, as you know, it's just simply like pick your favorite stories, put it in there, write an introduction, bang, you're ready to go. Not that it isn't tremendously easy, but yeah, I went with our friend Jean Marie Stein, who's the publisher of Sizzler Editions, and we both worked with her for many years.
Oh, a long time, yeah, long time. And yeah, are you there? You dropped out there.
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, yeah, no, I and she's we love Jean Marie, and we're looking to publish something with her soon. The both of us actually would it be?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're working on a book right now. The title is still being worked out, but it's basically you and I, some of our sex ed articles, kind of like put together, which you did a wonderful job with, especially, and with like various interviews throughout the book as well. So I'm looking forward to it. It's pretty much ready to go. I'm going to send it over to Jean probably in the next week or two.
Cool. But what Chris is talking about here is that Jean Marie is an ebook publisher. First of all, I mean, we can get, and we have gotten our books printed for events. But she's a prominent she's a prominent ebook publisher, and Chris went ahead and published. But nowadays, as we both know, Chris, and people listening to this podcast, even if they're not published authors, probably know that or sense that you could do it yourself, so to speak, on Amazon if you want to. And that's not something that I've done a little bit. I don't know about you if you've ever put anything up on Amazon just yourself, but let's speak a little bit about the good and the bad there, about all that, if there is a good and a bad.
Oh, I think it definitely is. I mean, you're right. It's like I haven't done myself, mainly because it's hard enough to do the work just doing publicity. But I am thinking about doing a couple of just sort of experimentals, just because it'd be kind of fun to see how that works. But yeah, it's gotten easier than ever to self-publish. I mean, it used to be much trickier. Now it's Amazon basically makes it like a streamlined process.
Really? Yeah, they do. Yeah, but within there, we've talked about this on the show before. We've talked about this live when we're live and in person, as opposed to dead and in person. But we talked about the pitfalls of the Amazon paradigm and how Amazon has undercut people like Jean-Marie in a way.
Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the problem. It's like it's funny. It's like over the just only a couple of decades, it went from the old school model where you wrote a book, you sent it to a publisher, and they put it out. And there were self-publishing presses, but they really charged a ton, and they were really kind of sleazy. But then Amazon kicked in, ebooks kicked in, and now it's not the getting published that's tricky. That's actually spectacularly easy. It's getting noticed is the hard part, because so many people are writing books and putting them up. The game has completely changed.
Right. Well, it's the same with the music business. There's a glut of stuff out there, and like you said, rising above the din. I can't speak for you, Chris, but I can certainly speak for my laziness, and I'm real good at not wanting to do much more than just write, and so it's heavy lifting for me to do beyond much more. Not because I think I'm a prima donna and I don't want to get involved. I know there are people that do the copywriting and the and the covers and the marketing better than I ever would. So I like to have a machine behind me, and I just sent out 2 different books recently, to two different publishers I've never worked before, giving them a shot. And they're both collections,
cool.
Like you were saying.
That's wonderful.
But who knows? I don't know if they'll be accepted. And it's just in that theory that Jean-Marie used to tell us anyway. She used to, because we would go to Jean-Marie with a book sometimes, and she just wasn't ready to publish one, or what, for a multitude of reasons. And she would certainly prompt both of us to go to other houses. Not that she doesn't want our work, and she almost takes our work in sight unseen, but she was always about spread yourself as far as possible. So that was my theory. My theory is, well, I'm going to give this one to this publisher, and therein lies another story. I'll get into it in a second, but I don't know. I don't know if they'll be accepted. I'm waiting now, and if they're not accepted, do I switch the books and send one to the other, or do I put it out myself? I mean, I don't know. And we're talking about here, kids, erotica. That's what we're talking about here right now, and it's a niche world.
Exactly. You're completely right. That's one thing I really admire about Jean for a lot of reasons is, sometimes we both worked with publishers, before that have been kind of like, didn't really understand how the game worked. So they would, I remember one time I worked with one, and they wanted me never to publish anybody else again. It's like, screw that.
Right.
Because first of all, like you, I write all kinds of stuff, and they only published one kind of book. So it's like, that made no sense. And like Jean likes to say, it's like, it's seriously, it's like wanting to like grab them by the shoulders and go, are you serious?
Right.
But like Jean has an excellent point that if you have a book with her and you have a book with somebody else, the publicity that other publisher does will help her book sales, because it gets your name out there, which I thought was just really very intelligent. So I was really admired her about that. But yeah, it's just like, that's why it's like, I always tell people, it's like, be very careful about like what a publisher wants from you in regards to like your work. If they just want it like, only write for them, if they're upset with you writing for somebody else, that's not really cool.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's feast or famine out here. We're doing our
Mm-hmm.
best to spread ourselves in a million different ways over a lot of different things, and that works synergistically. And then somebody will say to you, well, that's exclusive and you can't. And I'm like, well, yeah, I don't mind selling the book. The book's yours, but beyond that, I got to
Mm-hmm.
be able to write, for my daily bread in the only way I can.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems and to be so, to be just you're like circling the airport where this is my territory. I don't want anybody else to touch it. Seems
Mm-hmm.
kind of crazy too. And because and this is
Absolutely.
why I told you about this. What happened to me was in one of those instances, the second publisher I sent to, I only came across that publisher because a friend of ours, their press was bought by this bigger publisher.
Mm-hmm.
And this is somebody we worked with before. I won't say the name because I don't know if they want us to. Nope, nothing bad. And this one house was an erotica publisher, very specific stuff. And we both have worked with her and this house before. Anyway, so I wrote this new
Mm-hmm.
publisher because I just got hip to them because of that they had bought this other place, and
Mm-hmm.
either the CEO, the acquisition editor, I don't know who she is. She wrote me back and said, "Oh yeah, I've met you, and I know you through," and she knew me through this other lady. So, and then you subsequently told me I met her. I don't remember meeting her, but the funny thing about all that is that's the classic case of what we talk about not burning a bridge. Because if I had been less than my wonderful stellar selves to the one publisher who this lady had bought, the word
Mm-hmm.
would have gotten around when my name came up somehow, when I sent something recently. Or if I had, when I met this woman who I don't remember meeting, if I had been a jerk, which, we are never jerks, even when we're in a
Mm-hmm.
bad mood, we're never jerks in public. Yeah, it would not have served me either, because it
Mm-hmm.
really is a small world, really,
Mm-hmm.
especially what we do is a really small grouping of
Oh
people,
yeah.
you know, and
You put it perfectly as always. It's like, it's like it's a very small pool and you don't want to piss off people. I mean, yeah, you should stand up for yourself, but there's good ways of doing that while still maintaining a good relationship. And if you
yeah.
turn into a prima donna or an arrogant twit, it's like, it's going to haunt you.
And that's what happens with you and I all the time, because we hip each other to jobs and publishers and
Mm-hmm.
contacts all the time, that
Mm-hmm.
and that's what that's how, and we'll get into one in a minute. But um if we didn't keep a relatively good relationship with people, I couldn't recommend you and you couldn't recommend me, because it would just be
Mm-hmm.
guilt by association.
Absolutely.
And it's good we don't do that. But I don't see, and in this day and age, being able to find someone or their reputation very quickly, it's very dangerous to burn a bridge.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's like, again, and that's something that a lot of people, when they first get into publishing, make the mistake of. It's like, it's really kind of a tightrope walk, because if you're frustrated with your publisher, you definitely don't want to be vocal about that. I mean, it's very tempting.
Yeah.
A lot of people are very tempted to get on social media and bitch about their publisher, and it's a big mistake unless they're like really ripping you off and you want to warn other people not to work with them.
Right.
But things like you didn't like the cover, or you think they didn't do enough publicity, not only would that publisher get cheesed off, but other publishers notice that and don't want to work with you because they think you're going to be a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
So, that's one thing. I hate to say it, but it's really important to realize that you aren't the genius you think you are sometimes. And there's somebody right behind you who does just as adequate work, but is not a pain in the ass.
Well, I mean, what they used to say that all the time about band members, like half of the gig is showing up on time and having your instrument in tune. Like there's always somebody ready to jump in there. And you hear of stories all the time where an actor took over that role because of one guy. I mean, if you're so thick-skinned where, well, I don't want to be second choice, or they're just picking me now because then you're never, you're just not. That doesn't serve you in any kind of way. You just have to. If the opportunity presents itself for whatever reason, take it.
Absolutely. And you're so right. I mean, there's so many stories of musicians who, this guy was, a prima donna or was passed out in his, in his room, and that person took the stage, and guess what? A career is launched.
Right. That happens all the time. And it's one of those. Yeah, I think you got to do it. Remember, like in the movie Roadhouse of Patrick Swayze, he told the bouncers, be nice. Like there's like, I just like, even if you got to put a face on it, a public face on it, and you feel otherwise, and you and I can bitch to each other because we can. Nobody hears us bitching, right? And you and I have had those long discussions, whether that we're sitting in an airport lounge or we're on the phone or wherever we are. We've had those discussions where, no, I'm not working with him or her again, and you were agreeing, or you're giving me your story, whatever. But that doesn't go beyond there. Like, we dish to each other, but in public, if somebody asks us about somebody, and we've been in public when we've encountered that person, and we're both very nice all the time, right? We're like, yeah, how you doing? Like, and I'm not saying those people have been nice back to us, and usually they haven't been, but
absolutely,
we're always nice. We're always like, yeah, good to see you. Like, always, like, at least giving somebody one of those sidelong kisses, and like, fake hugs or whatever, a fist pump. We're always like halfway there,
and that's so important, I think, too. It's like, to find, if you're a writer, or a creative person in any way, find a group you can talk to and share things with, like we do, because a lot of times you don't know what's going on. Like, I just talked to a friend of mine who was very depressed over getting rejected. And I finally wheedled it out of her who this editor was. Yeah. And, I felt a little guilty about it, but I told her of my experiences with this editor, that they're really hard to work with. They are very frustrating. They'll, ask for stories and then not take them, all this kind of stuff. And, I hope I made her feel better at the end of this, but it kind of, again, it's like, you can't confront a person about that directly. But if you have good buddies like you are, mine, and hopefully I am for you, absolutely, you can actually do that. It's like, you can sort of say, hey, is this person a good person to work with? And then we can be honest with each other, because you look at social media and everyone thinks everybody's fantastic. That's because that's kind of the way the game's played.
Right. Or if the reverse is true, people are shooting off their mouth before they even count to 10.
Yes.
Which, I'm just like, I think that's really dangerous, because I've been affronted, so I'm going to go on social media and tweet and twat and Instagram and all over the world, where, first of all, the world's not about you, and second of all, you're throwing out a flamethrower here, and you're gonna burn a lot of bridges, and just don't just simply choose not to work with that person again. You and I do this all the time. We've come to those conclusions many a times where we're like, probably not going to go there ever again. And it just didn't work for you, or didn't work for me, or it's a cautionary tale, and you find it differently. Then there are those instances too. We have encountered people, and we find them different for each of us. So there's no rhyme or reason. Now, there is one wonderful person we came across recently, and you were on a show, and so was I. And at the moment, she's playing a little teaser reel of Licking on Vanilla on her show, on her podcast. Cool. So I'm talking about Lori Beth Bisbee, and she has let me tell you the name of the show. You know that it's the name of the show, but I'm going to say it for our listeners. It's called Dr. Lori Beth Bisbee's Erotic Library Podcasts. She's on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and you were on the show. You were interviewed and you read a story. And
it was fun. Exactly. It was a very fun experience. I don't like reading necessarily, but that was actually went, I think, fairly well.
You know what? She caught me off guard when I was on the show, and it hasn't been aired yet. It will be. Yours has been aired, I believe. And she caught me off guard because she's like, "Oh, so you're ready to read something for us today?" And I went, "I was not ready." So we just bullshitted for the hour, a half an hour, whatever it was. But let me tell you where you can find her, and then I'm going to play you a clip of you actually on the show. We're going to put it in the middle of our thing right here. But anyway, you could find. Let me give you the place you can find her. You can find her at Dr. That's Dr. Lori Lori Beth BETH BISBEY .press. Also at the same URL.com. And then she has a Patreon page, which is Patreon, Patreon.com slash backslash or forward slash Lori Beth Bisbee. And she loves to showcase erotica and erotic writers and anybody that of a BDSM fetish, fantasy, sci-fi bent. She's into a lot of cool stuff and into a lot of cool bands, because we talked about a lot of cool bands when I was on her show. And we're gonna play right now this little snippet. It's only, I think it's about a minute long, and then we'll come right back. So here it is, Chris. Let's play it for everybody. Have them listen to it.
Get comfortable and enjoy a peek into my erotic world.
So what are you going to read for us today?
Story is called Pret-a-Porter. She had to give him that. The salesman was good, damned good. Always reserved, if not eyes lowered shyness.
Dr. Lori Beth Bisbee's Erotic Library. On this podcast, I'm inviting you into my personal library to experience my favorite erotica.
Okay, we're back, and you're listening to Licking Non-Vanilla with me, Ralph Greco Jr., and across the aisle is...
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian.
And that was Chris you just heard on Lori Beth Bisbee's little snippet from her show, which is called Dr. Lori Beth Bisbee's Erotic Library Podcast. And we thank her so much for sending that little snippet in, and she's playing our little snippet. It's nice to get your snippets out there, Chris. You know, it's nice when you share snippets with people, you know. I told you when we started the show, I was talking to a friend of mine in Las Vegas, and I don't know how we got on the subject. We got in the subject of kink as it exists in different countries. And I seem to notice, as in my small experience with kink in other countries, and I only know that other than maybe because I work for a German publisher when we put out von Gutenberg, the latex magazine. And this woman was talking about Germany and the kink scene in Germany as opposed to the UK and you know, anime in the Orient and all that kind of stuff. So, and I know kink is different from city to city. What's your finding, or what's your thoughts about kink as it exists and the differences from city from country to country, if you've seen the differences?
You know, it's like it used to be really kind of delineated. I mean, I remember reading a book on early erotic cinema.
Okay.
And it mentioned things like, I mean, we're talking about like the age of the smokers, which are these like, what was it, like 8mm films, and
yeah,
that was the only thing you could really get as far as like moving picture erotica. I mean, of course, this is before VHS, internet, or anything. And you know, the book had talked about that you looking at like films produced in certain areas had certain kinks.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was corporal punishment. BDSM was very popular in Great Britain.
Right. I've heard
in
that.
Italy and Spain, porn featuring nuns and priests was very common.
Makes sense, right? Because of the strength of the Catholic Church in those areas, right?
Exactly. And I can't remember offhand what the others were, but of course, you know, now we have the age of the internet. This has all kind of gotten a little blurry.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like everything is kind of popular all over the place. So I'd be very curious to see if that actually has changed. I do know, like, for instance, you know, certain countries handle, you know, certain kinds of erotica better than others. I mean, like, you know, certain countries are more conservative, or they're, you know, they're more reserved. So, you know, things are a little bit more underground, which can make things even more spicy. Other places are more open. So you kind of lose that edge a little bit. But yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's like, I do know some weird things, like, for instance, now this is maybe apocryphal, and I apologize if it is, but I did read, like, for instance, you know, like, you know, hentai, which is not really the right word for it, but we're going to use it anyway, which is explicit, imagery and stuff from Japan. You know, it's a very common trope to have tentacles, right?
Yeah.
And I, you know, it's really funny because it's like the story I heard was that, you know, even though there is kind of a history of, you know, tentacle porn, you know, going back from, you know, long time ago, like the Edo period. I think there's a famous one by Hakusai that shows a woman being ravished by an octopus. But primarily the reason why it became so popular was because the Japanese pornography laws were very explicit, that they said you can't show like, penis sex.
Yeah.
So what do you do if you can't show penis sex? Well,
because there's something that represents it.
Tentacles.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So I always think that was kind of fascinating. It's like how this kind of like subgenre of erotica like came about because of the laws involving, porn and such. I think it's gotten eased up over the years now. So it's like, well, tentacle porn still exists. It's not quite so, prevalent.
Yeah, I don't, it's interesting because with this woman that I was talking to, she said to me, like she, in her studies, and she's a sexologist, so she studied, quite a bit of stuff. And she said in her study, she's noticed in Japan a lot of a lot of imagery, not even pornographic imagery, a lot of imagery of an infantile nature, like the Hello Kitty, or the or the like the little funny little furry animal on the traffic sign. There was a lot, she seemed, and if you look at a lot of the, I guess it is the hentai, a lot of the anime characters in their erotica are very, very are either they have that kind of schoolgirl edge to it, or they're almost, the faces on the men and the women are very elfin and very, it's very, everybody's almost, I mean, there's a line between, they play a lot with gender, and it seems, and again, I don't know why that exists there as opposed to somewhere else. And I mean, I can understand there's a certain stereotypical vibe to, and we saw this with Liza Minnelli in Cabaret. The Berlin era openness of Germany, and the uniform idea, because of their background, and their history, and then you've heard about like the English vice, which is supposedly corporal punishment in England. So there are some tropes that probably are stereotypical in a way, like you said, they've fallen by the wayside now. But in America, I'm thinking, and I'm just totally spitballing this, I'm thinking, do you think the difference in kinks, if there are any, and again, it may all be fallen by the wayside now, but exist city to city, as opposed, we're the size of many countries in Europe. So do you think because of that we have more of a delineation from city to city? So where New York is more this way, San Francisco is more this way. Like I don't know. I mean, I'm just asking.
I would pretty much say so, because a lot of, I mean, back to your question about the hentai really quickly. One thing I also, want to chirp in with is just that, I mean, it's definitely is very cultural. There's very delineations about what is considered sexy and what isn't, and permissiveness and so forth. And one thing I've always kind of remembered, and again, I apologize, I'm not a Japanese expert, but this is something I had heard, is that sometimes the Japanese particularly get really weird and explicit, and I'm sorry for that sounds judgmental, but the law is big because for a long time, I think it's pretty much true the same today. There's this delineation between fantasy and reality in Japan. So it's like, something that we in the United States or other countries as well, we like to almost kind of like want to make our fantasies a reality, but in Japanese society that doesn't exist. It's like that is fantasy, that is reality. The two don't mix. So one can be very wild because there's no expectation of becoming real. Right. In our country, when we look at something, we almost kind of like wish it would happen, which also explains why people can get so hysterical around, certain kinds of erotica. They think it's like that's sort of an invitation to this actually become a real thing. Yes. But back to your question, it's like, I definitely think that, certain cities have different breakdowns. I mean, if you look at, for instance, San Francisco, which, I think it's losing that demographic because of the whole, cost of living that is there now. But for the longest time, had a very large, queer population. So naturally, that kind of, thing will generate and, will attract that certain kind of, adult material. The same way I've heard that, kind of extreme porn shows up a lot in the red belt states or in down south, which is, I think, really kind of weird. In fact, I heard that, and again, I apologize, I should have sources available, was that, in conservative states, red states, consume a lot more explicit material than other states. Which I think is kind of interesting. I'm not too sure why. I mean, I think part of it is that kind of like, don't, saying but not doing kind of
the
thing.
Repression.
And, and I think also it's like some other countries that are more accepting of, sexuality, it just becomes part of the background. It's not exactly like a big deal. If you look at like, sex work in Europe in certain cities, it's just, there's the red light district and that's been there forever. And that's just part of life is to have a red light district. Other countries are like, no sex work. So sometimes that kind of forbidden aspect will actually make it more alluring, and generate more interest versus where it's just simply just part of the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly you and I, you've traveled more than I have, but we certainly have been all over the world. So I haven't partaken of of erotica, porn, kink, really beyond the borders of my own mind. But I guess there was a time where printed material was harder, was the only thing you were getting coming in, and now it's people who don't really know the world before the internet. There were magazines specific. If you had, there was a million different magazines for whatever your little particular want was, and so they were published sometimes. Like I remember specifically in Germany, there was a lot of cosplay, a lot of latex published in Germany.
Yep.
And a lot of corporal and uniform governess kind of things coming out of England, and and the leather scene. I mean, you and I were actually together in San Francisco once. We went to, I think I don't know the store. Was it Mr. Leather that we went to? We went.
Oh yes, Mr. S.
Mr. S. And that was a pretty hardcore. I mean, it was predominantly gay male. I'd say.
Yep.
Yeah. And that was relatively hardcore as far as the scene goes. And it was what, either right or wrong, I expected in San Francisco at that point. To see that kind of hardcore stuff there. And you and I, of course, we also, because of where we met initially, we talked about this before. One of the trips there was the kink.com's armory, where they have all their filming and stuff. And that was this huge space in San Francisco. That was a kink space. So you're not going to get any more down in the middle of a city, tried and true, fetish than that place. So I would say at one point, San Francisco probably was quite the mecca for the leather scene, the gay male scene, and for sure, and certainly the kink scene. But again, and New York too, but not New York. I come from the New York area, so I've been in clubs in New York, but nowhere near what you guys had in San Francisco. And I got into it, and I saw that later. You were you were there earlier than I was, so the scene must have been sparkling there at one point.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like, New York's always been kind of the porn capital of the world, but I think it shifted for a while to San Francisco, and then it shifted. And part of the reason why it shifted from San Francisco, from what I've heard, was a couple of reasons. One of them, which was that they passed an ordinance that it was mandatory for sex people in adult films had to wear condoms. Now that also could have just been an excuse because. But anyway, I heard that was one of the factors. But also, it got expensive in San Francisco. I mean, it became very, very prohibitive pricing. And that moved, I think, to Vegas. But again, now with with at home stuff and amateur stuff, you can do it anywhere. But yeah, it's like during that heyday, that was just like it was bonkers. I mean, in fact, I was just reminiscing with my friend Dr. Amy Marsh that we had both been in the city around that time, and how it was like this. And we're talking about early 90s, late 80s. And, even though it was a time of, great deal of anxiety because of the HIV and AIDS crisis, it was still like there was like parties every night, and there was like, you know, places like Mr. S and Image Leather and Stormy Leather and so forth that you could, you know, get all your kink on. And you know, I was part of the Society of Janus group there for, you know, a number of years.
It's a very,
you know,
very
taught
famous
classes
group,
and hung out with them and such. But yeah, it's just like it's interesting too how like certain cities and times will change. Like you mentioned, like Berlin between the wars was a famously, wonderfully decadent, you know, time. And there's other places as well. And sometimes the pendulum swings the way. And unfortunately, San Francisco is no longer that. I mean, there's still places you can go. There's still like Wicked Grounds. There's the Citadel. There's Catalyst and a bunch of others. And actually the last I heard is that Kink still owns the or is still using the Armory, but that may have been a mistake. But there's still some places there, but not like it was.
No, and I mean I think that's true. And you know, it's funny too. I think, and this is pretty an innocuous kind of reason, but when we traveled, the first Kink convention I believe we did together was St. Louis, right?
I think so.
Okay. So Chris and I Chris and I always say this, we don't know who we slept with to get this gig, because it was just it was an amazing gig. They just treated us so great, and you know, everything was, you know, was on them. And you know, we went twice, and we did classes and met some fantastically wonderful people. But the thing about I found with them, probably the first time, the second time I was ready for it, but was that so St. Louis is, I guess, I don't know if that's the Midwest. I don't know how mid that is, but anyway, it's certainly not the coasts that we're used to. And Chris and I, and good-naturedly, we were getting ribbed all the time by them, and good-naturedly that they couldn't tell when we were being serious or being sarcastic, because Chris and I lead with a relative sarcasm most times. And because I guess that's just in our natures, and most people I know do. I mean, because being from the East Coast and you being, you know, spending most of your time in the West Coast, you're used to that kind of quick repartee of sarcasm, and they weren't used to that with us. And a couple of times they would say, "Are you guys joking? We don't know what you guys." First of all, you guys are talking faster than anybody we know. That's first of all, you're talking way too fast. And second of all, it was, are you joking, or are you not? They couldn't tell. And I think, and I don't know, but I think that sensibility where they kind of mean what they say, and they're very warm and open people. I think that feeds their kink life. I think their kink life is there's a lot of, it seemed to me there's a lot of families, quote unquote, in their world. You know, if you go on, and I'm not telling Chris anything he doesn't know, but I'm telling our unknown listeners here. If you go on FetLife, or you go around a lot of kink conventions, there are people that are they're together in groups. They're either in the family of this, or the you know, under the protection of whatever, and it's a way for groups to, you know, congregate and meet like-minded and feel safe when they're playing and go to conventions. And in that world, in St. Louis especially, I saw a lot of that, a lot of families. And it also could be because maybe the scene isn't that big there too. But I was always struck by the fact that the way people acted, their sensibilities, which was to be very honest, very forthright, not sarcastic, kind of fed kind of the kink, which was not what they did, but how they did it, the approach to it. I don't know if you found that.
Oh, I definitely did. And, you know, I think it's also interesting that, like you mentioned before, how a lot of people in that particular area were into families and such. And by the way, when we mean families, we mean like, you know, found families where, you know, groups will get together and create, you know, their own families. So usually, you know, BDSM or polyamory. Exactly. But, you know, one thing I did also notice is, and this is just kind of like my observation, and keep in mind, this is just, you know, my frame of reference, is that conventions like, you know, like the one in St. Louis and other ones, you know, there is a public scene that goes on between the events, but it's not like in other parts of the world. So when the conventions come around, it's the convention. It's you know, that's that's the thing everyone goes to, which is why I think so many people were so wonderful, welcome, and excited for it to happen. Other places like, I'll pick on San Francisco, because San Francisco has such a regular, active BDSM community where there's like, like I said before, there's the public, dungeon of the Citadel, there's the Wicked Grounds coffee shop, there's Mr. S and so forth. It's always kind of like, there in the background. So when they do have conventions, they are very much low energy. They're not quite as well attended. And so there's a little less sense of a kind of a cohesive community. It's kind of like you do your own thing and that's cool. And, I went to a couple of conventions in San Francisco and I was always kind of struck by that because, you go to like St. Louis and it's all, everybody's huggies and kisses and, welcome, have a good time. And San Francisco, it's, it was there, but definitely not that degree. So I think sometimes it's like not having a regular scene kind of is a little, not necessarily better, but it just makes that kind of like, familiarity.
Oh, I agree. And we've said that, we were like, these people are really warm here. And this is not, and being a little bit jaded as we are, it was really welcoming. I mean, it really was wonderful. They were wonderful. I couldn't ask for a better time, Well, let's just say where we're at the moment. You're at Licking Non-Vanilla, this podcast that Chris and I do as much as we possibly can. We have guests on sometimes, and sometimes it's just Chris and I yammering away like we're doing right now. And we were talking at the beginning of the hour, we were talking about publishing erotica and where that gets you, good or bad. And right now we're just talking about the differences in kinks that we've found, and like Chris and I were saying, there's a difference, but it's not so much anymore because of the advent of the internet. Now you can go on FetLife or you can go on Collar Me or you can find a munch somewhere and pretty much get your kink on, where years ago you couldn't. You'd have to wait to get a magazine in the mail and maybe about a kind of fall into a bunch of kinksters if you were lucky, But I mean, I remember years ago just trying to find stuff was a bear, and you'd find one magazine that lead you to another, and somebody was putting out a zine, and it was very, very hard to find, any kind of material on a kink that you may have. Nowadays, everything's out there, and it's wide and a wide variety of stuff, probably more stuff now than we've ever seen,
Oh yes. Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. It's like, I don't want to date myself, but I still remember when I was, a young person, how, finding an adult magazine was like some kind of like secret treasure. And, it's just like, it was pretty much like, sex shops were there, but they're kind of intimidating and scary and creepy. And, of course, that's the only place you could pick up explicit stuff. And I remember particularly, my favorite source for erotic stuff was actually National Lampoon, because you could buy it over the counter and the stuff was pretty outrageous, but it was also something you could find anywhere. And I particularly like its style of doing it.
Right. And there's always some like topless chick in a photo play, and you like,
oh, exactly.
Cool. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. There was actually a writer named Chris Miller who wrote the movie Multiplicity of all things. And, he's actually a teacher, I understand, back east somewhere. I've always wanted to write him because his stories were outrageous and then some, but they're also very sexy. And that's sort of like where I think some of my erotica, writing voice comes from, is his work. But yeah, the National Lampoon in its heyday was a magnificent thing. But yeah, it's like now, of course, I can just, type in 3 words on a search engine and get more, explicit and, a number of content than I ever would have imagined. And that, it didn't change. It seems like it changed overnight. And of course, now it's not just, pictures, it's pictures, stories, videos, games, you name it. There's an erotic thing of everything.
Yeah. Cause it went from, and then even online, I remember like the nascent days of, there was like chat rooms. And then there was, like, I think Yahoo had a chat, like a regular chat area. And then there was like a secondary chat, which was the naughtier stuff. And then there was news groups. And, there's like all this stuff where people were finding, and this is not even porn we're talking about. Well, I'm just talking about people trying to find like interests of sexual interests. I'm not talking about anything like pornography ran rapid on the net. You know, we were talking to Bridget from Hot Movies about that the other day, and it, you know, that, but just for normal people looking for stuff, the minute the internet opened up, people were like, well, we've been searching for this conduit for years. Now we have it, so let's exploit it. You know, and I can find some guy or girl halfway across the country or the ocean who's going to be able, not halfway across the ocean because they still be in the ocean, but halfway across the world, who's you know, who may be able to hook me up with some scenes or a movie or what. I mean, and you know, with all this, we know comes some bad stuff, and it always does. You know, some dark stuff that shouldn't be out there.
Oh yeah.
This is what happens when you have you know, freedom opens up like that. There's always going to be exploitative moments and things that are illegal, and you know, things that shouldn't be out there, and that's where Chris and I did, and I can certainly speak for Chris. Well, Chris and I, we traipse very lightly and cautiously because there's a you know, because of being sex writers, there's a lot of great sex positive stuff out there, but you can be easily lumped into or accused of being someone else and doing the bad stuff.
Oh yes,
you know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the good news kind of about the explosion of erotica we've seen over the last couple of years, it's harder to target individuals, but that doesn't mean that still means you still have to be careful, because all it takes is one zealot, you know, to notice you and make your life a living hell.
Yeah.
And there's still many places in this country where they will subsequently just arrest you on whatever charges they want just because you wrote a certain book or, you know, wrote a certain story, and they'll just, you know, and we are talking about like not just like things that should be, you know, called into question, but just general erotica itself. So, you know, that's something I think it's that's always important to bring up to people who are, you know, interested in being erotica writers, that and it has gotten better. But it's still something to always keep in mind. If you have kids, if you have a sensitive job, if you've got family members who, you know, might be a little overly zealous in their religious, you know, beliefs, you know, that's something you really need to be careful of and be very clear to separate, you know, that your erotica writing from everything else, because if it bleeds over, you're in serious trouble. You know, there's been judges that take kids away from families because someone's erotic writing. There's been, you know, I mean, one of the worst cases happened during the days that you just mentioned of, like, you know, modems and BBSs and such. There was a famous case where a sheriff somewhere, I think it was like North Carolina or something like that, extradited a couple from California to his state and then charged them with obscenity, because California's laws on obscenity were pretty, you know, blah. Right. But in his, it was much more stringent and more scary. And he actually extradited. He actually had them arrested and brought to his, you know, state so he could prosecute them. And that was just terrifying. But, you know, that thing doesn't happen that much anymore, but it still doesn't mean that there isn't, like, you know, police officers or district attorneys or just, you know, overly zealous, you know, religious people out there who would love to see your life just, you know, be miserable because you write erotica.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of erotica, like Chris was saying about in Asia and here, you know, we kind of blur the lines a lot here. You know, there's fantasy that obviously is fantasy. There's, you know, men our age, you know, spanking girls in little schoolgirl skirts. And you know, obviously, you know, if you go to the site, the models are all, it's, you know, they're all signed at over 18, and it's all legal and above board. But within that fine line, people can find it. If you're looking for the devil, you're going to find him, you know. And you can find really bad stuff that's not even in there if you're looking for it. And because we don't make a delineation between reality and fantasy so often, or so stringently, maybe in our fiction and or our visual porn, the line can get blurred where people assume you're doing one thing when you're not, you know. And someone in a movie says the word mommy, and then you're in a whole different place, you know. And
oh, absolutely. That's why when like you're excellent at writing age play stories, but you have to always be very clear about what's happening.
Yeah.
You know, I've actually, you know, as an editor, not you, but I've actually
Yeah.
rejected stories from writers who did an age play story and didn't put in enough emphasis that these are adults pretending to be young. And because I could, if you read the story, it was confusing. I didn't want to really, you know, end up being arrested and, you know, and so forth. So I would just reject the stories and tell them why. But you've always been very excellently clear about that, because that's just really important. That these are, you know, when you're talking about age play, it's not using actual young people. It is using adults who are pretending to be young people. And that's important. But still, a lot of people don't understand that. And I often really think we need to have a better word than age play, because it's kind of like you have to always add that caveat at the end because people get confused. But yeah, it can be very, very tricky and very problematic. And there's still a lot of people out there who are really totally misinformed about all kinds of things about sex and erotica and so forth. And they're the ones you got to worry about.
Yeah. It's not all you good people out there listening to us. You know, we realize you're all normal and sane and happy and healthy. Just looking for a good time and maybe a one-handed tickle. But as always, that's what we're trying to provide here, right, Chris? Just a little respite from the day. Once again, you've been listening to Licking Non-Vanilla with one of your hosts, Ralph Greco Jr. The other host is I'm Christian over there.
Hi there.
You know this Chris to his friends, but you have to call him M. Christian. And it's been wonderful talking to you, Chris, as always. Can't believe it. The hour just spun around and by us. And if you get a chance to check the Dr. Lori's site too, her podcast, she's doing some good stuff over there. And we're gonna come back with another show with some guests and stuff. So, Chris, it's been great. Thanks so much again.
Always, Robbie.
We always have a good time, don't we?
Always a delight.
Yeah. Well, we are wonderful. What can I tell you? It's tough being us, Chris. That's all I gotta say. But at least we can handle it well. You know, we shoulder the burden. You know. But okay. So next time we'll see you on Licking Non-Vanilla. This is Ralph Greco Jr. saying bye-bye, and that's
M. Christian, otherwise known as Chris, saying farewell.
Bye-bye.
And visit us on the web at www.lickingnonvanilla.com.